I want to talk first about the question of personal data that we're all generating, often without even understanding what we're doing. I wanted you to explain to our viewers a little bit about the data that we create and the ways that others, often unknown to us, are using it. So then we can then talk about ways we can control and maybe even monetize it.
So if you look at the things on the internet that we consider free, they're not actually free. They are in fact things that we pay for through our attention. So we're essentially selling our eyeballs, sometimes unknowingly, but we're selling our attention through these platforms that are really not conducted in our best interest. So the big problem that we are trying to solve is to figure out a way for people to take control of that transaction, or at least control if they want to. Now, I'm not, advocating that people, scrutinize everything they do online. I'd like the solution to be passive and almost invisible, but people should be at the forefront of making decisions about their attention, because it's one of the things that we really, that makes us who we are.
So the question is what the social media companies that we use that allow us to communicate with others, share things. What do those companies do with the data that we often unwittingly are creating? How do they monetize it?
Well, basically, they build a profile of who we are, and then they sell access to that profile to advertisers. And that's the basic model. That's how Facebook works. That's how Google works. These are all basically advertiser paid platforms, which means that you are the product. In other words, you as an individual, or sometimes as a representative of a group, are getting packaged up and sold.
So now we come to the question of your new company, Invisibly, and the ways in which you propose to give us greater control of that data, allow us, in effect, ownership of it, and I gather are thinking about ways that we could actually monetize it, get paid for the use of it. Tell us about Invisibly's basic business strategy.
So the basic strategy is to allow consumers to opt in or opt out to their uh, ad viewing, and to a greater extent to opt in and opt out to the way they consume content. And let me explain what this means. Right now, what we have is an economic model that allows no consumer input except by the amount of time we spend on a thing. Okay, so if I like something, the only way I can sort of vote that up is by spending more and more time consuming that thing. And that's a really inefficient way to consume. It would be as if food were sold by the calorie, you know, and the only way you could, you know, pay for a good restaurant would be to eat a ton of food. So I think what Invisibly is, and it's an experiment. Like, we don't know if this is going to work, but it should work. And I've worked out all the math, and I'm actually on the Fed now, so I've gotten some great economists at the Federal Reserve to sort of vet this math for me. But the idea is basically this: give people choice over how they choose to engage with ads and engage with content, and then allow an economy to flourish. So we think about, I'm in a big city right now. I'm talking to you from New York City today, and we have great restaurants in New York. And the reason we have great restaurants in New York is because there's competition. And if you're a lousy restaurant, you go out of business. But if we wanted to wipe out culinary excellence in New York City, there's an easy way to do it. And that is just say, okay, every meal costs $10. And you'd say, oh, great, I'm going to go to New York City and eat in a great restaurant. But you wouldn't, because that restaurant would go out of business. They can't afford to put food on the table for $10. Now, they can afford to feed you, just not what you used to be getting. So the business model that would all of a sudden take over is, let's make the cheapest food possible and that is barely acceptable to the public. And all we have to do is be a little bit better than the next person, but no excellence. That, unfortunately, is the economic model that gives us content right now. So with a couple of exceptions, you're one of them, the Washington Post. Actually, we got a lot to talk about the Washington Post, because you're one of the organizations that asked me to do this 5 years ago. But with the exception of 5 publications in the English language, Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Economist, and the Financial Times, most are supported by advertising. And that advertising is basically, it's an economic model where the only way you can pay more is by spending more time. And that's a terrible way for me to generate revenue for content.
So if I hear you right, a part of what you're proposing to do is make more things in effect services that you're opting into. The Washington Post is free only up to a point, and then you have to be a subscriber. Is that part of the idea that you're working on?
Yeah, I don't think it should be free at all. Or if by what you mean free, I can trade my attention for access. I think that's a fair trade, but that's not free either. Okay, so I believe that good content, like good food, should cost a lot of money, and I want to pay a lot of money for good things, and I want to pay less money for bad things, and that's how the economy works. The economy works by us, voting with our dollars. And that's what gives us basically everything that you see in the world has been vetted by this sort of invisible hand of capitalism that says, well, we'll pay more for this and less for that. And that signal, unfortunately, doesn't exist in the world of advertised-based content. In the world of advertised content, basically you get clickbaited, you get tricked, you get they break the promise all the time. They basically say, here, look at this article that's going to be great, and then you realize that no, it's not that great, but by then you've seen 20 ads and they win. So in the Invisibly system, what we imagine happening is, first, we're going to give people basically a payment. We're going to say, here, do these things, which are basically viewing ads or ads for surveys, things that normally Google and Facebook would be paid for, but we're just going to pay you. And it's going to go into this wallet. And then from that wallet, you can spend. And you can spend it on content, or if there's enough in the wallet, I guess presumably you could spend it on other stuff. But right now our focus is to allow you to be able to afford whatever content you want effortlessly. And so if you look at the average revenue that a newspaper or magazine makes on an article, it may be a fraction of a cent. So what we do at Invisibly is we envision a world where that fraction of a cent purchase is made by essentially an invisible agent, essentially it's an agent. It's somebody who works on your behalf, who understands your preferences and is going to make those payments for you. Because you don't want to be bothered with spending half a cent here and 3 cents there and, oh, this was really good, I'll pay a nickel. Nobody wants to be bothered with those amounts. But the idea is that in aggregate, those amounts are what create the content that we put in our brains.
And Jim, how will I pay Invisibly to be, in effect, my content manager and purchaser in the ways you describe? How will that work?
Oh, like a classic agent, we're going to take a cut. I've got an agent now. Believe it or not, he takes 20%. I think we're taking something like that. It's a standard. There's going to be a little sort of fee, but the point is more to allow the person to exercise decisions, because here's what we want to do. I want to create a world where somebody who creates content, let's say you've written an article or a book, okay? So we're going to talk about my book later. Let me tell you about my book. Every time I rewrote it, it got shorter, okay? I drafted the thing 8 times. Every draft got shorter and shorter and shorter, because that was the value. It was taking this big pile of stuff and just reducing it to its essence. But if today I'm writing an article and the article takes 10 minutes to read, and I say, boy, if I spend another 2 hours on this, I could get the essence of this article down to something that takes 5 minutes to read. There's no incentive to do that, because the advertising revenue for a 5-minute read is less than a 10-minute read. So we're encouraging the creators of the world to sort of overstuff everything that they create.